Next, we've got Piers, who will talk about the same item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So I applaud the Council for their ACON-produced city emissions inventory from February, and for the new emissions inventory that's partly under discussion today. And I do note that the Council is taking a bolder approach than others by including international aviation and shipping emissions, or trying to. There are some issues there, of course. And this is crucial because since climate reporting entities and sectors are producing their climate change scenarios as part of their obligations under XRB guidelines and FMA compliance, these involve considering the ways in which relations between global climate and economy may impact future business endeavour and government planning. Now, I'm here today as an environmental social scientist working in climate change and sustainability, and this has included assessing Christchurch Airport on its green transition efforts. With the airport's sustainable transition leader, I'm co-author of a new peer-reviewed paper on the airport's decarbonisation and energy transition planning. I have seen the memo of 14th of May, that's yesterday, and I can confirm that Christchurch Airport is indeed acting in line with its statement of intent, including the commitment to expand its thinking and its leadership on decarbonisation and to take the lead on net zero aviation in New Zealand. In many regards, we've got great reason to be proud of our airport. It is the leader in this country. But Council needs to appreciate there's a difference between the airport measuring its international emissions and its reporting of what are defined as controllable Scope 3 emissions. That excludes the vast majority of international aviation emissions. So the fundamental point I would like to make today, though, concerns the importance of thinking beyond this bureaucratic compliance of emissions reporting. So we need not only more ambitious targets, but also bold transition plans. And the development of these in climate disclosure regulations are still at a very basic level. We've been working on the mitigation, we've been working on the adaptation, but just transition is where we really need to be thinking, which does include considering the employment issues and the security concerns of citizens as we make changes. And these plans, they need to incorporate greater consideration of systemic risk. And I was very pleased last year to see that the final report of the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, it added systemic risk alongside physical risk and transition risk to the types of disclosures that our entities should be making. But we also need to take an integrated perspective that not only considers emissions, but also energy, materials, and social and environmental impacts. There's a real problems with this kind of narrow focus on emissions at the expense of all else. And this leads to the other point. We need to make a genuine commitment to transformative change. It's beginning to appear, it is hard. I'm not criticizing anybody. It's not easy. So we need to take a much more critical approach to roadmap policy documents. Many of these are not scientifically credible, and they make unrealistic promises of future change to justify continued business as usual. So I can illustrate this with research I was commissioned to conduct for Wellington Airport last year. So in the slides here, you can see some of the industry-backed and national-backed plans for net zero aviation in 2050. They tell us a nice reassuring story of how we can meet our carbon targets and still carry on. They include interim targets for 2030, and they depend on the upscaling of sustainable aviation fuel production. However, an inquiry by the UK's Royal Society has found them unrealistic, as has a peer-reviewed paper by Susanna Becken, who was, until last year, a member of Air New Zealand's own Sustainability Advisory Panel. By the way, if you have a look at this one here, Making Net Zero Aviation Possible, one of the partners in that is McKinsey. And you might like to know that McKinsey are currently subject to criminal investigation by the US Department of Justice for their role in supercharging the sales strategy of Purdue Pharma and its product OxyContin, responsible for the opioid epidemic. So that gives you an idea of the credibility of some of the agencies involved in drafting these plans. and their ethics. So, many of these, I'm nearly done, many of these roadmaps endorse a 3% growth rate for aviation, and they suggest that we can have twice as many people flying in 2050 as we did in 2019. And as I argued in a recent lecture, these plans by naive techno and regulation optimists, they actually represent a form of climate disinformation. Their hopes depend on the fallacy of decoupling economic activity from environmental impacts. And yet, even the International Energy Agency, they're in the middle there, even their net zero planning models a 12% reduction in flights. And demand-side reductions are not a feature of national and industry roadmaps. It's more, don't worry, the technology will deliver. Only with the CLEVER report, and that stands for Collaborative Low Energy Vision for the European Region, only there do we find a report that considers planning for sufficiency rather than profit, based on what we can energetically afford to meet our needs. For aviation, this translates to a 40% reduction in flights. So that leads to the very, very final point, and that is the idea of systemic risk. The World Economic Forum has endorsed Adam Tooze's polycrisis idea. It's a concept I think we should all be aware of here in this room. It's gaining traction. In their Global Risks report, the World Economic Forum models scenarios for 2030 concerning the conflict potential over the forecast shortages of food, water, metals, and minerals by 2030. This reminds us that we cannot have a renewable energy transition without reduced production and consumption. The resources to support it on the basis of continued economic growth are too scarce, the emissions incurred too great, and the likelihood of supply chain disruption too high. We've got some really hard thinking to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, just one question, please. Councillor Harrison Hunt, please. Yeah.
Kia ora. That was very high level within 5 minutes, and I'm really interested in that, particularly around the decoupling of the economic and climate emissions and the internal and external contrasts. I'm wondering if you're able to send Council a lot of your information via email. That'd be great for us to give it a good read over.
Thank you very much. I'd be more than happy to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Next, thank you very much. Next is Graham, who